Welcome to our first tutorial. You will be working on the two-dimensional constraints tutorial for Onshape. To get started, we're going to click on this blue Create button and then select a document. We'll name this document Two-Dimensional Constraints. And then press OK. When your first file opens up, it'll look like this. You'll have 3 different work planes that you can use and a navigation cube to help you navigate through your screen. Before you can do anything, you'll have to start a sketch and create a two-dimensional sketch. After that, you'll be able to extrude that sketch and manipulate it into 3-dimensional objects. But for this tutorial, we'll strictly be working with 2-dimensional sketches. So to start, I'm going to create a sketch, and then I'll choose the work plane that I want to start on. I'm going to choose the front because your front view is usually your largest and your most descriptive side, making it so that I can create more of the drawing in less steps. This program doesn't automatically orient your sketch to be perpendicular to you, so I'm going to come over here and click the front of my navigation cube so that I'm looking perpendicular to my sketch. Now we're going to start with a line command. You can either click here or you can press the letter L on your keyboard, and we're going to draw a rough sketch of a polygon. I'm going to left click and release, drag my mouse, 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 left click and release to complete the sketch. Your sketch may not look exactly like mine right now, but once we're done adding constraints and dimensions to it, ours will be exactly the same. So don't worry about it being perfect. To escape the line command, we're going to right click and press escape line, or you can press escape on your keyboard. And now we're going to use our two-dimensional constraints to manipulate this polygon. If you look here and click this down arrow, you will see all of your two-dimensional constraints. The way that this works is if we were in class and I were to need a pencil, I could say, student A, please go get me a pencil. However, the program doesn't work that way. You want to flip those commands. So first you're going to pick what you want to happen, and then you're going to pick what you want to apply it to or who I would want to perform that command. So instead of saying, student A, will you go get me a pencil? I'm going to say, I need a pencil. Student A, will you get it for me? So I'm going to choose a command first, and then I'll pick what I want to apply it to. Based off of our instructions, we're going to want to apply a horizontal constraint to this bottom line here. So I'm going to come over here, find the horizontal constraint, and then left click on that bottom line. I'll right click to escape that horizontal constraint command, and then we're going to add a perpendicular constraint to the bottom line and the line on the right. So I'll come over here, back to my constraints, choose perpendicular, choose the bottom line by left clicking, and then left clicking on the right line. Our next step is to fix the bottom right corner, which is right down here. If you drop down your constraints menu, you'll see a fix command. We'll select that, and then you want to be careful selecting only the corner or the vertex, not the lines themselves. So just this corner, and then that should turn these two things black, meaning that they're stuck in place. Our next step is to apply a vertical constraint to the line on the left. So if I drop this down, I'm looking for a vertical constraint, and then I'll choose the line on the left by left clicking it. Our last step will be a parallel constraint, which is right here. And we want a parallel constraint between the bottom and the top line. So I'm going to select the bottom line and then left click on the top line. And now we have a rectangular shape. Next in our directions, we're going to apply some dimensions. So here is where we found our line command. Here is where we found all of our two-dimensional constraints. And then here is where we'll find our dimensions. We'll choose this dimension command, and then we'll click on the bottom line to dimension it. So you'll left click here, drag your cursor, or drag your mouse, and then left click again. The dialog box should prompt you to enter a value, and for this one we're going to put the number 4 and then press enter. As you can see, my sketch is now out of view. So if you want to zoom out, you can either scroll on your touchpad or you can scroll using your mouse and it will zoom out. If you have a mouse and you press the scroll, it will grab your drawing and drag it along. This is called panning your drawing or panning your screen. So if it gets out of your view, you can use your pan to drag it. We're now going to add one more final dimension to this particular sketch. We're going to left click here, drag it out, left click again, and then for this one our value is going to be 3. And then because of the constraints that we applied throughout this sketch, this 3 will apply to this line as well, and this 4 will also apply to this line without having to dimension each of them. I'm going to right click and escape the dimension, and then we'll move on to our next sketch. If this were a real project and we were going to turn these sketches into three-dimensional objects, it would be important that you're putting each of your sketches on a new sketch. So selecting this green check mark to finish sketch 1 and then making a new one. However, considering that this is just practice and we will not be using these sketches to create any three-dimensional objects, you can just continue drawing around this rectangle. So I'm just going to scroll over and start drawing up here for my next shape. This next shape is just a little bit more complicated than any of the other ones. So it will look a little funky whenever we first start. But just follow along and trust, and it will look exactly the way it's supposed to by the time we're done. So I'm going to start with the line command, and I'm going to left click somewhere about here and then go up and to the right somewhere about here and then left click again. I'm going to press escape and then press the L to repeat that line command. I'm going to leave some space and then come somewhere about here to somewhere about here and then press escape. Press the L again, left click here, escape, L one more time, left click here, and then left click here. You want to leave some space in between each of these line segments, and then we will fill them in using an arc. Your arc command is right here. So you'll select this, and it's a 3-point arc. So you'll need the starting, the end, and then where you want it radius-wise. So left click here, and then just guess somewhere about there. And then you'll repeat that process for each of these. Don't worry about the size of them. Don't worry about if it looks perfect. When we go back in and add our constraints later, it'll adjust accordingly. Left click here, drag it out there, left click, left click, left click, left click, left click, left click. Something like this. The first constraint we want to add is called a fixed constraint. So we're going to click this fix, and you want to apply it on this center point of this arc. Please do not select the arc itself. You don't want to lock the arc, but only its center point. If you lock the arc in place, you won't be able to adjust its size later. So we're going to select here. The center point should turn black, leaving the other 3 and everything else blue. We're now going to choose the tangent constraint, and you're going to work your way around the sketch, making sure each of the arcs is tangent to each of the line segments. So start here, left click, 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 just like that. Now, we're going to add horizontal constraints between these two center points of the arcs. So I'll choose horizontal and I'll select here, and then I'll select here. We're then going to add vertical constraints between these two. So I'll switch to vertical and go here and here. And then we're going to do equal constraints for these two arcs and then these two arcs. Be careful about which arcs you're clicking because the order of them is important. So we'll select equal. We want these two to be equal, and then we want these two to be equal. After that, we're going to go through and add some dimensions. I'm going to start by dimensioning the center points, and then I'll add the arcs in after. So if we go from here to here, left click, drag it out. We want this value to be 4. Looks a little funky right now. And then we're going to go from here to here. And we want this value to be 2. And as you can see, it looks like I missed a tangent right here. So I'm going to fix that before I proceed. So here to here and make that tangent. And now I'll go back and finish my dimensions. So from here to here, keeping it vertical, don't let it pop out that way. Keep it horizontal like this. You want this one to be 0.25, enter, and then you want from here to here to be 0.5. If for some reason your sketch starts to twist up, meaning you literally have loops in it or something, that is because of the order that you did your dimension. So if it didn't work, try to do the opposite of whatever you did. So if you did the 0.25 first, like I did, and it twisted up on itself, then do the 0.5 first and then go back and do the 0.25 second. Our last step is going to be dimensioning our arcs. So if you click here and drag it out, this one should be 2. And then since we made these two equal, the top one should adjust accordingly. And then I'm going to zoom in and select this one over on the left, and this one should be 1. And then since this one and this one are equal, the other should adjust accordingly. And that completes your second sketch of your first tutorial. Now, we're going to zoom out, find some space to draw our third sketch. Again, I'm going to roughly sketch it out using my line command, and then I'll go back in and add constraints and adjust it. I'll start with my line command, and I'm going to start with the line segments, and then I'll go back in and add the arcs after, very similar to how we did this one. So I'm going to go here and to the left and click, down and click, and then to the right and click, and then escape that line command. I'm going to repeat that line command and go somewhere like here and go to the right, down, and then to the left, very similar to what we did over here. Right click and escape, and then I'll connect these pieces using an arc. So select this arc, left click here, drag it out, left click, drag it out. Something like this. Doesn't have to be perfect. We'll go back in and adjust everything accordingly. Okay, so now we're going to do some equal constraints. You want the top and the bottom line to be equal, and then the top and the bottom line over here to be equal, and then the top and the other top to be equal. So I did this one and this one equal, this one and this one equal, and then this one and this one equal. And then you also want your left and your right to be equal, and you want your top arc and your bottom arc to be equal. Now when we go in and add a couple dimensions, everything will adjust. So now I'm going to select dimension. I'm going to select this left line over here, drag it out, and left click, 2.5 for my value. We want our arcs to have a radius of 2. We want the overall width, so I'm selecting this line here, and then drag it out. You want your width to be 8, like this. And then you want one of these line segments to be 2. And since we dimensioned them and made them, or we constrained them to make them equal, if you do 1, it should adjust everything else accordingly. If you go back in and try to add any additional dimensions like this, you'll see that they turned gray. This is what we call a driven dimension, which means that it's already been established through constraints and you won't be able to change that dimension. In order to change that dimension, you would have to delete some of your constraints. And so if going forward, if you ever see any gray dimensions like that, just be aware that if you proceed any further, you'll over-constrain your sketch and create a sketch that's not functional. So this completes your third sketch. Now we're going to zoom out a little bit too far, make some room, and create a heart-like shape, and then we'll go back in and adjust it. So I'm going to start with my line command. I'm going to draw a V, left click, left click, left click, something like that. Right click, press escape. Now we're going to draw an arc, left click, drag it out, left click, drag it out, something like that. Now we'll go in and add our constraints. So first we want this bottom line to be horizontal. If it's already horizontal, great, but just apply that constraint just to be on the safe side. Then we want the bottom and the left line to be perpendicular. Bottom and left, perpendicular. We then want each of the arcs to be equal. So we want this arc and this arc to be equal to one another. Can zoom out. And then we want to make this center point go to this line. So you want this point to share this line. That's called a coincident constraint. So you'll select coincidence, select the center point, and then select the line. It'll pop it down like that. And then do the same thing for this one. Center point, and then this vertical line, and then it'll look like this. And now whenever we add our dimensions, everything should be correct. So we'll pop a dimension on here for a value of 2, which will adjust this one. And then we're going to pop a dimension here for a value of 3. And then here for a value of 3. And as you can see, my drawing twisted up on itself. This is exactly what I was trying to explain earlier, particularly up here. So if you have something that happens like this, my best advice would be just to start over. And it more than likely occurred because of the order that I did my dimensions. I kind of felt like it was going to happen and I should have stopped sooner, but I didn't, so which is okay. So instead, I'm just going to come back, and it's probably faster to just redraw it. If you want to be intentional about your dimensions from the start, you can go ahead and make, oh, you can't do that in this program. You can make these lines the correct size before you proceed any further. So there's always more than one way to do something. So I just drew 2 line segments, kept them perpendicular, and then dimensioned them. So now whenever I go in and I add my arcs, this won't happen. So now I'm going to go in and add my arc, left click, drag it out, left click, drag it out, just like that. So as you can see, this is much closer already than the way I originally started. Sometimes it doesn't matter, and sometimes it's just a little funky. So just be careful and restart if you have to. It's not a big deal. The more you work on this, the better you'll get at it. Now I'm going to add that coincident constraint again to make this center point share this line, and this center point share this line. And then I want my two arcs to be equal. I want them to have the same radius. And now I can come in and add the radius of 2. And as you can see, that time it worked. So if this ever happens to you, just start over, and that's my personal opinion, and then just be careful about where you're putting your dimensions and what order you're putting them in. All right, so that is 4. And we have one more sketch for this first tutorial. I'm going to scroll over and make some room, and I'm going to try to draw it as roughly accurate as I can using my line command, and then I'll save the arc on the right side for last. So I'm going to start here and left click and drag it this way. I'm going to come up and to the right, left click, down, up and to the right, left click, go to the left, right, left click, sorry, and then escape your command. So all of these were left click. So left click, left click, left, 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 left. Left clicks. Sorry if I confused you. And so now we're going to come in and add the arc. Left click, left click, left click like that. And press escape. We want this arc and these two lines to be tangent. You can see this one's already tangent. But I like to go in and add it. I don't always see the label there that it's tangent, so it doesn't hurt to apply it again. This one won't over constrain it. If you repeat the constraint more than once, it just won't apply it again. And then we're going to go in and add some dimensions. This we won't dimension. If you look at the instructions, the paper instructions, you'll see that that dimension is in parentheses, which means it's a driven dimension, like this 2 over here. So we won't do that one. It'll automatically fill in that information for us as we proceed. So now I'm going to go in and start adding my dimensions. This left edge here has a distance of 5. It's a big adjustment, so I'm going to zoom in. From this left edge to this center point of our arc is going to be 9. And then from this center point to this top corner is going to be 2.5. This is going to locate the center of this arc in the center of the shape, like this. We want between this line and this line to have a 45 degree. So if you click between two lines, it'll automatically ask you for a degree. And then same thing from here to here of 45. Enter. And then we want this line this way, not vertically, if I can even get it to go vertically. You want it to align to it. You want it to have a dimension of 1. So just be careful with that. And then once you add that final 1 dimension, it should complete it. If I come over here and try to add a dimension, you'll see that it does have the same value of 1.793. If I try to do anything, it does turn it gray. Again, a driven dimension. Instead of parentheses, it'll just make it gray. And that will complete your first tutorial. Going forward, just note that if you plan to extrude any of these or turn them into any sort of 3D object or want to use them for a project, each of the sketches needs to be on its own sketch because you won't be able to do anything with them. If you extrude or turn any of this stuff into a 3D object, once you extrude one of them, the rest of them will disappear. So just be mindful of that when you're going forward and think intentionally about where you're going with your project. So I'll complete my sketch. If at any point in time you need to go back and edit something, you can always come over here, double click and edit that sketch. And then once you're finished with it, click the green check. Now to submit this tutorial today, you're going to click share. You'll choose link sharing, turn on link sharing, copy this link here, and then paste it into the text box for your first tutorial on Canvas.